from the point of seeing that energy descent was the least thought about future, even less than the idea of catastrophic end of civilization, I thought it was important to try and look at the diverse ways in which energy descent could unfold, not just differences from place to place, but also in a sort of a global process level. And my future scenarios work was based on a two-way variables of the variable of how fast oil would deplete post-peak, the uncertainties about that ranging from maybe 2% per annum to more catastrophic at 10% per annum. And then the other driver that I thought was the most powerful single driver of the future, which was climate change. And whether that was going to be relatively benign and slow in onset, or whether it was going to be more severe and rapid. And that then created four quadrants, four combinations that I called the scenarios. So I was suggesting that these macro energetic climatic factors, even though they are actually sort of caused by sort of human activity, would end up being things that happen to humanity that it will have to adapt to, both at a collective level and a sort of a community level and right down to an individual level. And so I called the relatively benign onset of climate change and relatively slow decline of oil green tech. And obviously that's, you know, the most sort of least disruptive of the energy descent four scenarios. And then brown tech was a similar slow decline in oil but rapid climate change. And that was characterised by more weather and climate crises, droughts, floods, cyclones, that sort of thing, as well as the same as what's happening in the green tech, a contracting economy. Because my green tech scenario is not what a lot of people talk about of a green tech growth scenario. And then the possibility of a much more severe decline in oil that would actually lead to a quite rapid unravelling of the global economy and leave people much more dependent on just whatever was actually in their bioregion or accessible locally. So that would involve what a lot of people would call some sort of collapse, but that is likely to lead to a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions so dramatic that it might save us from severe climate change. And so I call that Earth Steward, because it's a scenario where, having gone through this sort of quite catastrophic collapse, things then settle out into the new scenario where the seasons are still largely working, nature is working, agriculture and food growing are possible, but in a much simpler society, scarred by the huge effects of the collapse of the global industrial economy. But of course, with all of those resources all lying around to reuse. And then the fourth scenario I called lifeboats, and it was where there is that same collapse in the global industrial system, but we end up in the climate cooker anyway. And that is possible via the tipping points that have been postulated by scientists, that there are mechanisms like the release of the tundra methane and the melting of the Antarctic and Greenland ice sheets and ocean acidification and other processes, that once they get to a certain point, it will no longer be driven by just greenhouse gas emissions from humans. It'll be self-reinforcing too. And mostly, you know, people just talk about that as, oh, well, that's just the end of the world. Whereas I suggest that even in that world, some sort of reorganisation would happen. And I model a lot of that on what happened in the decline of Rome with the monasteries, how small groups of people actually conserved a lot of the knowledge and capacity of civilization who were better set up to do so, but society overall goes through some sort of dark age at least. So, of course, that does assume that the runaway climate change just doesn't keep leapfrogging and actually take us out of energy descent into truly collapse, where maybe there's a few people left living on the edge of the Arctic as hunter-gatherers, as some climate scientists and activists have said is a possibility. But that would push us out of the energy descent future truly into collapse. So all of these things are sort of quite relative, but what I showed from that is that it was possible to have strategies and responses that were adaptive to all four of those scenarios. And a lot of what we're talking about in permaculture and transition initiatives and simplicity concepts are actually useful no matter which of those four scenarios is emerging, because that's actually the point of scenario planning, to try and tell plausible stories and not necessarily pick winners, but have strategies that are useful in all of them.